Welcome to today's episode of the Psychedelic Mom podcast. I'm here today with Scott Berman. How are you today?
Good. Yeah.
I love that
thanks.
you're outside. You're in Oregon?
Yep. Kind of our last warm days.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
So you have some interesting retreats that we're going to discuss today. You are the founder of Sky Cave Retreats, which is a darkness retreat center. And it's the first one in the United States. And you have been doing this work since 2012. And you've spent 70 days in multiple solo darkness retreats. This whole idea of being in darkness. What made you head to this work?
Prior to my first darkness retreat in 2012, I had spent a lot of time off in the wilderness, in the mountains, mostly in southern Baja, and then also in Mount Shasta in California, but mostly in Baja. I'd spend 4 to 6 months every year up in the mountains there. And I'd usually be like a week at a time, come down and get food, go back up. And there were times where I'd spend 40 days at a time up there. Not
In
seeing
darkness
anyone.
or just in wilderness?
Not in darkness, just
Yeah.
like in solitude up there. But that was the beginning of exploring for me, solitude, time alone, time outside of culture overlays, and just like what's there when it's just me? What's there when I'm not gauging my worth based on culture, based on others, based on spiritual practices, just more of a real attuning within what feels good, what feels right, what makes sense. And so that was the beginning for me of starting to spend a lot of time alone. In 2010, somebody mentioned a darkness retreat to me, and it really piqued my interest since I had such a affinity for time alone. And so in 2012, my wife and I blacked out our house, and that was my first dark retreat with my wife, and we spent 5 days in darkness in our house. It's very different doing it alone, some things we could kind of circle back to, and it's obviously very different doing it with someone else. So it really moved me to explore a solo dark retreat. So I went back down to Baja a few months later, and some friends had started building this earth bag dome that was underground, which kind of like informed our later dark retreat versions, which are underground. And so I helped finish build it. I blacked it out. It wasn't built for dark retreat, but I blacked it out. I put some air ventilation, and I went in there for 10 days. And that was my first solo dark retreat.
Whoa.
And that was in the spring of 2013. And
Wow.
when I came out of that, I was, I was quite shocked after my first couple days in there. I went in with a spiritual ego of like, this is going to be fine. I'm going to love it. I'm really well prepared. I know solitude. I've spent years alone. I can meditate for 10, 12 hours a day. So this is going to be great. And it was way harder than I thought. And I realized that I actually wasn't really prepared. Everything that I had done wasn't really in the vein and the flavor or quality of what was really like of what the darkness asks. And we can circle back to this. I see that a lot with people who come here, that there's some people feel like they're really prepared because they've done a lot of plant medicine, they've done a lot of breath work, they've done a lot of meditation, they can do hard things. But we see over and over again that the people who are most prepared, a lot of cases, have never done plant medicine, have never meditated, have never done any of that, but they have a quality of openness, of softness, of curiosity, the ability to surrender. And like that actually prepares people more than kind of more masculine, linear, top-down type of practices. It's more in the qualities of being. And so I went in and I was shocked by how challenging it was, and was also taken by it of like, this is a completely different way in. It's a completely different quality of being that I actually don't have very developed. And so I came out. I wanted to build dark retreats right after that. That was in 2013, but the pieces
Wow.
weren't there.
First of all, what called you from the beginning to wanting so much time alone? What was the desire there?
Um, Psilocybin played a really big part for me earlier in my life. Of the first time I had mushrooms, I was probably 17, but it was the first moment that I touched a place inside of me that was like full, that was fulfilled without any result, without any reflection from the world. And it was the first time I realized that, like, well, my essential nature is happy, is complete, is whole, without anything. It doesn't need anything. It's not even like I was having a grand experience or profound visuals or any, it was just like the feeling within was full. And that kind of started to move me towards turning inward and getting interested in meditation and spirituality and different explorations like that. And that continued to deepen. And so I started to kind of lose interest in the world, I guess we could say. There wasn't really anything that I wanted in the world. I had good fortune of coming from an upbringing where financially we were comfortable. There wasn't struggle. So I didn't have, there wasn't really the sense that if I have money or more money that I'd be happier or happier. And so that didn't really play. Status and all that was not really something that was moving me. So all that was really left was this exploration of my interior. And so that really moved me to start spending a lot of time alone.
So now you went from spending this time in nature, in wilderness alone, to your first dark retreat. What was the difference between being in wilderness alone versus a dark retreat alone?
Well, one thing that like really hit me when I was in my first solo dark retreat was that like, it was like I lost all my friends, was kind of the feeling. Like out in the wilderness, I had the sun. I mean, during those times, I used to spend 2 to 3 hours a day sun gazing and just being in direct relationship with the sun. And then the rest of the day, I was in the sun, just sitting on the rocks, meditating. I had the water and the trees and the cactus. I was more in the desert. And so there was things to be in relationship with. And all the sky, the stars, the moon, all these things that were like a part of me and things that reflected wholeness, simplicity, harmony.
Cycles.
The cycles, movement, the qualities of nature. All of a sudden that was all stripped away. And that was really, I think in that first day when I went in, of how that really hit me of like, well, I have nothing to relate with, nothing to remind me of these really simple, beautiful, harmonious qualities. It was just myself, whatever was left. And so that being one really big difference of everything was stripped away. And then I also found near the end of my time in solitude that when the evening would come, I would really descend a lot deeper into my being. I was able to feel more deeply within. I could attune to more subtleties. I could like really, my thoughts changed. They slowed down. I could actually feel the impact of my thoughts on my body. Like there was a lot more that I could connect with when evening would come in the wilderness. And so at a time I was like, whoa, there was a feeling of like, I want more darkness, because I'm noticing that there's a lot more that comes online. And during the day, I'm naturally just pulled out of myself more. I do practices. I explore more in an expressive way. I spend a lot of time singing and dancing and screaming and shaking and more cathartic practices. And so I went into the dark. What I found was it felt totally unnatural to do a lot of these more top-down, cathartic, kind of more masculine, super linear practices that were they had a beginning and an end. And I think that's one of the things in the darkness is like, the people come who have meditation, and I had the ability at that time to meditate 10, 12 hours a day, but in the darkness, there's no beginning and end. You really drop into this eternal landscape. And so someone may meditate 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 hours. You may sleep for a few hours, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours, but then what happens next? You're done meditating, you're done chanting, you're done praying, you're done sleeping, you're done working out, you've done all the things, and now what? And that's really when it begins in the dark, is when you're done asserting your will for some effect, for some goal, for some something that you self-reference back to, like you being able to feel meaningful or worthy or purposeful. And so that really struck me and continues to strike me in there, where there's no amount of efforting that really lands you in a space that you can just be in and be sustained in it. Like, sustainability really becomes an interesting thing. The most sustainable thing in the dark is resting, is opening, is softening, is surrendering. All these really feminine qualities is what's sustainable, because at a certain point you exhaust yourself with effort. Even if it's meditating, you complete. And so another thing was how quickly you attune to subtleties in the darkness. Like how quickly you feel the depth of your being in your heart, subtle sensations, how quickly you slow down. And I had done a lot of the 10-day Goenka Vipassana meditation. And what it felt like to me is where I was at after maybe 8 or 9 days in that 10-day meditation course, I was at after 1 or 2 days in the dark without any formal practice, just resting. And I could feel the same level of sensitivity that I had, the same depth of being that I had after meditating really intensely 10 hours a day for 8 days. I had resting in the dark for 1 or 2 days. And so that really took me, because now I was at a place in my life where I don't have 2, 3, 4, or even 1 month to go off into the wilderness and unplug. But like I can make time for 4, 5, 6, 7 days to go into the darkness. And the level of how quickly I descend within, how many layers of my subconscious come up, how many blind spots and things that I don't actually realize are informing my behavior and my movements, that I see in the darkness because I can't do anything. And I see all these ways in which I move and cover and insulate and numb how I really feel. But now you can't do that.
Yeah. So I'm curious about that, because you had obviously done some work before. You had a deep sense of kind of wanting the inner life. You probably knew what shadow work was. You had a way of reflecting in to look at these aspects of yourself, probably even in the meditation, just the subtleties of sensation in the body. For someone who doesn't have that and comes into a darkness retreat, and there's not somebody there kind of guiding them in a somatic inquiry of what's there and let's go in, how do they do in that setting? How do they integrate what's coming up and even know? Is it just the beingness itself meeting their own beingness?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that we do bring into the experience is there's a 2-hour session before they go into the dark and a 2-hour session after. And that is totally somatic based. And it's also with someone here who has worked with 95% of the dark retreatants who have come here in the last year and a half. So also has a lot of experience of witnessing what happens to people in the dark and how different people are organized in different ways, that then how they move in the dark, how they cope and numb and insulate and don't even see, or how they're impacted. And so there is this beginning to attune people somatically in that way. And then I bring up the food every evening, and I kind of check in with the dark retreatants every evening, and sometimes in the morning as appropriate. So there's usually maybe a 2-minute to 20-minute conversation through the food pass-through box, where we connect. And so there is a little bit of assistance in self-inquiry. Like most of what I do is asking questions. Sometimes there's suggestions of like, when I'm in the dark, I enjoy exploring this way at times, not for a result, but more for the exploration. Or like I notice other people really benefit from exploring this. And so sometimes I'll offer explorations or inquiries in that way. And a lot of times it's just asking people how they're feeling and asking different questions. So now they're, for a moment, seeing themselves through another lens, through different questions and inquiries that they wouldn't have seen otherwise. And also just pointing of like, for example, like sometimes there's like, are you aware of at times a space between thoughts? And what we've come to see here is a lot of people who have had no meditation experience, who find themselves new to spirituality or maybe they're more even there for like, they wouldn't even call it spiritual to them. It's like self-help or self-care, or is a handful of those people have dropped into such profound meditative states without any effort and really have like, it's so not special. Like they didn't even know that it was, for example, there was someone here some months ago, and by his second day, he was having hours of stillness, no thoughts, nothing. And I was like, you realize people spend a lifetime meditating and they never get to that state. They're lucky if they have a couple minutes, and you're just suspended in hours of stillness. And there's like zero spiritual materialism because like there was no effort. There was just the softness, the openness, the slowing down, and the darkness really. And I see that a lot, that the people who don't have a spiritual history or background have less to deconstruct in there, because the material world gets pulled from them, and then they don't have the spiritual ideas of who they are and what it looks like. And so they're able to actually go into the simplicity and kind of be squeezed through into the profound on the other side. But myself included, people who have a lot of spiritual ideas and ideals kind of are looking for something grand, because that's going to reflect back a sense of spiritual worth and meaning. And so actually going into the simplicity, going into boredom, going into discomfort is actually not a way that they would typically go. But the other person has no choice because they don't have these modalities and techniques to keep their head above the water. They just drown and then come out the other side.
Speaking of drowning, I can imagine that every now and then when you're giving the meal, someone's might be experiencing existential terror or like, oh my God, I feel like I'm being annihilated. Those human primal emotions that we all carry to some degree and have to meet them at some point. Is that some of the stuff that gets illuminated in the darkness? Some of these primal...
I'd say there's definitely like that breakdown where people come undone. But what's unique is I'd say 95% of people, one of the top qualities when they're asked, how was the dark? How did it make you feel? Is they say they feel safe. Like there was two people that just went in the other day who were like both really scared. And when I went up to check in last night, they were both like, I thought this would be really scary and terrifying, and it's like I actually feel very safe and it's very peaceful. And I hear that a lot. And from women, we actually hear a lot that it's the safest that they've ever felt.
Wow.
Like there's something at a core level that like you're not concerned about survival.
Well,
and
it's
like
interesting because, you were hinting on just all the conditions that we have as human beings and our identities being, in some ways from the reflection of society, whether we're successful, whether we're in a relationship that makes us feel worthy, all of these kind of structures that then fall away, whether it's, in a darkness retreat or somatic inquiry or psychedelics. So what you're talking about too is like coming in. Some people come in with a lot of that conditioning still not yet broken down, whether that's because they had a religious structure that they came from, or more things to break down, or they just do. And other people are coming in kind of more open without all of that conditioning. And so then even when you mentioned, like, for the first time, women have mentioned they're feeling the safest, what came up to me was just the conditioning as a woman in society, the safety, just being in a complete darkness of how that's amazing to think that that's where someone is feeling the safest.
Yeah, I shared this a little while ago there was another woman, and there was a woman who works here too, and we were sharing that's a feedback. And this woman shared, she said, also women always feel like they're being watched. And she said, I didn't realize that until my women's studies teacher mentioned that. And I mentioned that to my wife, and she was like, well, don't you? And I said, no, I definitely don't feel like I'm always being watched. And there was another woman who was coming to the dark, and it was just alive in me in the time, and I was sharing with her, and she's like, well, don't you feel like you're always being watched? And then I've had this conversation with a few other people and with women, and then they're like, I'm going to ask my husband. I feel like and so it was interesting to me to see how deep that was for these women, that it was like for everyone. And then so this woman was just reflecting, like, for her to also be in the dark and know that she's not being watched. Like, even alone in my home, for women, there's the sense of, like, am I being watched? Am I safe? And so there was a woman who came, and she went as far as, she's just like, I felt safer here than I do in my own home.
Wow.
Like, and
Amazing.
so it's been amazing to witness that, like, just that has been enough for people. They didn't need techniques or spiritual ideas or anything. It was like they felt safe, so they were able to be vulnerable, and they were able to actually be with all the different aspects of themselves because they felt safe enough. And like that, just feeling safe was enough to take them into these really deep places within.
Amazing. So we kind of started, and I kind of assumed people know what a darkness retreat is. So why don't we just say what this darkness retreat is and what you've created there, so people have a deep understanding of what, there's kind of this assumption it's a darkness retreat. I know what that is, but why don't you explain what a darkness retreat actually is?
Yeah, sure. So I'll speak in specific to our caves here. They're built into the hillside. So there's like a door you open and you walk down some steps, and then there's kind of like an entry room, which is when we're attending to the people in the dark where we go. There's a 2,000-pound masonry stove that's in the wall that we use to heat the rooms in the winter. And then there's a little food pass-through box. It's kind of like a cabinet that I have. And then on the other end, there's also a cabinet. So I can open mine, put in the food, close it, and then on their end, they can open theirs and take the food. And then there's a door that goes into the dark space. And it's about a 300 square foot room. There's a bed, there's like a low table and a cushion for eating. There's a couple rugs, like 2 different areas. Like a new addition is we put a zero gravity chair in, which has actually been quite popular, just to switch up where people can be. Before it was just the bed or the ground, and now there's a chair where that kind of something else to do. There's a yoga mat, a foam roller, there's the bathroom, and then there's also a bathtub for hot baths, which really add an element that really bring people, when people are struggling, they have the bath. Yeah, and it's just the womb. It's just a dark, warm, safe container.
Wow.
And so it's so dark that your eyes never adjust to see your hand in front of your face. Completely dark.
So do they get to see this in the light at first, so they know where the bed is, or are they really kind of from the very beginning just feeling the darkness and feeling their space with their senses?
Yeah. Most people arrive in the afternoon and they have that day to get oriented. They go into this, so they have that day. They go into the dark that night, and then they spend their first full day here weaving in and out of the dark. So they might spend that night in and then come out in the morning or come out in the afternoon. And then they have that session with Adrian, who goes deeper into the somatic work. And then they really are just weaving in and out of the dark to slowly slow down. So it's not this extreme, like, from 0 to 10. And then the second night here, they go fully into the dark. And typical stay is like 3 or 4 days in darkness. Then they come out in the morning. They have that whole day to integrate. They have another session, and then they go home the next day. And so there is some padding on the end to really settle, to integrate. And then that time in the darkness, it is total darkness. And it's also like 99% soundproof. That you might hear an airplane fly overhead for like 5 seconds, maybe once in the day. And if a deer walks on the roof or a squirrel scatters, you'll hear that. But outside of those 10, 20 seconds, it's completely soundproof as well. And I'd say a lot of people come out saying that that was almost as impactful or more impactful than the dark. And it was something that they didn't realize, that like the darkness was amazing, but they had never actually experienced quiet
Silence
like that before.
Yeah. So who would want to do a darkness retreat? For someone that's listening that is like, what in the world? Why would I ever want to go into the darkness for 3 days to 7? What would your answer be?
Curiosity, I guess, would pop up first. I think there's the spectrum. Like there's people who, let's say on like the one end of people who do a lot of meditation, they do a lot of self-work, breath work, plant medicine. There's this exploration for who and what are we beyond our conditioned structure, beyond who we are in culture, beyond the work we do. Like there's a real movement, there's a real pull to like know who and what we are. So there's that end. And then there's the end of like, there's just a lot of people come, they're just genuinely curious. They're like, I don't even know why I want to come, but like I'm scared. And like, I'm really curious of something that I'm scared of that's actually not that scary. Like it feels safe and simple. And so there's this, some people just come on that movement, and other people, there's high performance athletes that come who are just like, I just want to rest, or really, really busy business people we've had come who are like, I've never had a day in my life where someone didn't need me. Or moms who are, there's a woman here, right now she has a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. And like, she's like, I haven't had a day to myself in 7 years. And so a lot of people who are just looking for a space to really rest, to unplug. It seems like a pretty extreme place to come rest and unplug, but there's something in it where that just pulls people. I think if they've seen some of our videos on Instagram or our website, there's like, they're witnessing this impact. These people who are coming out who are like deeply moved, and it feels really like there's something there. It's not like they were moved because they had this peak experience. It was like there was a deep change, a deep knowing, a new settling in. There's people who have come with ADHD and anxiety and depression, and they're curious of like, how would this reflect within me and maybe see things differently. And so some of those people who had ADHD, there was someone who was here, and one of her main takeaways was like, the anxiety that I experience that gets me going, like I didn't experience any of that in here. Like once you step out of time, what happens? And that's another piece in there that really takes people into this whole journey, is in the darkness, time is irrelevant. And so what happens inside of you when progress, accomplishments, achievements, time in general has no more meaning? And then so there's this, it just opens up a whole new world of exploration within. So it's a full spectrum of why people want to come. And it's something I ask, it's the first question I ask everyone when they arrive is like, why? Like, why are you here? And it's so varied, the answers.
Yeah. I mean, you're right, though. Your videos of people coming out are very compelling. Mm-hmm. It seems like all of a sudden the appreciation and gratitude for even having sight, for being able to see light, for being able to like hear the sounds of nature. and probably also the deeper sense of themselves, that the process that they've gone through. So what is it like for you and others, would you say, to meet that silence, the timeless space? What have you learned about yourself and about this reality, spending time in darkness and without time?
Yeah. It's for me, it's took my seeking from like a 10 to a 2. And I was a pretty intense seeker. I mean, I spent a lot of time alone. Nothing else really mattered. So it took that down where I could see in myself even the subtle ways that I grasp at experience to affirm my worth, even spiritual experiences, even stillness, things that I use to reference self-worth, which fit into time. There's like an arising and a passing. There's like a beginning and an end to it. And I think in the darkness, what's revealed and exposed is that anything that we use that has a beginning and an end to confirm worth or purpose, once it passes, we're either grasping for it again or we're feeling meaningless again. And so there is this thing in the darkness where it directly connects you with our timeless nature. It directly connects us with a space within that is complete and whole, irregardless of the wave that's moving through us. It doesn't matter. It's still connected to what's happening, but it's not, that thing is not determining our worth. Like, one thing that a lot of people get in there and that we really point to is like, it doesn't matter what's happening. What matters is your relationship to what's happening. And that really hits home with people in the dark, because you have that reflection directly in front of you of the darkness, of this timeless, still, unchanging presence that just allows whatever's in it to move through, and that remains unchanging and spacious and calm. And so I think for people, for myself, really connecting with that, when I go in now I still go in every year for 4 or 5 to 10 days, and I'll go in maybe once a week, every other week for a few hours. And when I return, there's this immediate settling and softening, and where it's like I can really meet myself where I'm at without this movement to try to change, to try to fix, to try to heal, to try to awaken, to try to move. It's just like I'm softening, I'm almost dropping underneath it while remaining in contact with it. And I think that's what it's done a lot for me. So that seeking is like, I'm not using experience. I mean, I am, but not as often using experience to reference my worth. And there's a real softening. It's taken, when I started to get into darkness, I was meditating 1 to 2 hours, and then at more intensive times, 10 to 12 hours a day for 10 years. And then I hit a period where I stopped meditating for a couple of years, where it was just, I could see my movement in that. My why was like, because I was looking for a certain state of consciousness, a certain state of being that would make me feel like meaningful, not necessarily connected, but like there was something in it. And
like an enlightenment seeking or consciousness seeking.
Totally. There was something that I was, and so in the darkness, you really get like, this is it. And I think like we've all heard it. There's somebody who left and he's just like, it sounds really cliche, but what I got was just be here now. And he's like, I've heard it a million times, but like, he's like, I know that feeling, like there's actually nothing else matters. And I think that really hits home in the dark, because you could have the most mind-blowing experience. People have amazing visuals. They have like these blissful experiences. But then when they're gone, they're like, now what? But now in the world, we have this amazing, blissful experience. We have this profound plant medicine, whatever it is. And then we get to talk to our friends about it. We get to be like, I had a great experience. Now I'm going to like take a bath and watch a movie or watch a show and go eat and like, like I earned this. But then in the darkness, you have something like that. And then you're just back into really the mundane.
This.
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
this, which is nothing.
Nothing.
And so you really begin to like make contact with nothing. And then the nothing becomes everything, but it's that direct contact.
Well, I'm curious because in that darkness, your eyes aren't closed. There's no visuals, obviously. Do you get a sense of non-duality? Can you feel anymore the sense of your body in that space, or is it just darkness? Can you feel your being in that space beyond what the stillness and the darkness is? Like, can you still feel your individual self, would you say?
Yeah, I'd say it oscillates. For some people and we encourage people to like stay connected to their bodies. Yeah. And that becomes new, like in that somatic experience, that's really new for people. And like there was one person, she described it as, she was like, I felt like I was in the darkness, but I was also a part of the darkness. And so that would then be both. Yeah. Like there's like the experience of being in it, and then at times it dissolves and people expand. I mean, a lot of people, one of the top qualities people have is spacious, that they open to the point where, there is this non-dual, it's just the darkness and that's it.
And what's arising in it.
Yeah. And that tends to be another sometimes way that we point for people, is when difficulty and pressure is mounting, to like also directly connect with the darkness, because that is, and so to have the presence of this entity thing, consciousness, spaciousness that's enfolding you. So it does bring people into that non-dual space where they're just floating in space.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm just thinking of, the polarity of the dark and the light. And in some ways it's going into the darkness. And in that darkness, it sounds like people are finding the stillness of that undefinable, unbound darkness, light, everythingness. It's kind of a paradox.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. It's amazing witnessing so many different people's experiences in there. And because there's no teacher, there's no modality, there's no teaching, there's no lineage, no dogma. It's such a wide audience. It's such a vast types of people that are attracted. And because there's so many different reasons, like usually maybe when somebody comes to like some spiritual thing or self-help, sometimes it's like, it's for this. But like we said, I mean, it's from like people wanting to know themselves to people just genuinely curious to people wanting to relax to, I mean, there's been some men who have come who are like, I want to be the best father and dad that I can be. And like, I was like, well, why the dark? Like, there's a million other things you could do. Why the darkness? And this one guy came and I was like, there's going to be a somatic therapy session. And he's like, what does that mean? I've never done therapy. Like, I've nothing. And like, to watch his experience in there, who has maybe has never talked to anyone about spirituality, like, or anything like that. And what he came into, these profound states of being, without any kind of reference. And then the language that those people use to describe it is so authentic, because it's not like, I mean, even for myself, I'm using
from something,
anything, right? Yeah. Nothing they've even heard subconsciously. They've got nothing. And so there's one guy and he was in there and I said, so like, is there space between thoughts? And he's like, that's all that's existing. And I said, how does that feel? And he's just like, it feels really weird. And it was just funny to hear. I mean, if somebody else in like a spiritual context would be like, I got it. And I'm just here and it's amazing. And he was just like, I don't know. It's really weird. It feels weird to my mind and weird to my body. I just like, I've disappeared and I don't know what's going on.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really cool. One of the things you mentioned I'm really curious about is what happens in the visual field. I just interviewed somebody recently who is looking at what's happening in the visual field during psychedelics, what's actually happening in the brain when you trip, and how the visual field, that it's almost happening in the brain was his perspective, and he's looking at that. So it's interesting that you just mentioned that you're in complete darkness, but people are having visions of sorts. So what do you make of that? And have you had that experience?
I've had pretty minimal, even in my 10 days. I'll see glowing orbs or the room. I mean, definitely the darkness feels more like a substance, like it's alive. And that's something that everyone says. It's almost like sparkles. And so it doesn't feel like a dead darkness, like it is alive. And there is the understanding, or from wherever it's come from, that DMT begins to get released in the darkness. I think that stemmed from Mantak Chia. My understanding is that there's no science behind it though. I don't know how he came to that, but that seemed to be like more of an accepted the belief of what happens, but there's no science behind it at the moment. And from what I've seen, the amount of time in darkness does not equal more visuals. So like there's people who go in for 10 days and have little to no visuals, and people who are on the first or second day have profound visuals. Like some people have dream sequences, like they feel like they're in an IMAX theater and the projections onto the walls of what seems like the wall of what they see. And then other people who see lights. And what's interesting is most people report that they want the visuals to go away. That they find them distracting. It's just like they've been in this cocoon and now they feel like there's something that's like infringing on this really open, vulnerable space. There's one person, I was bringing him out in the morning, and when I brought him out, he's like, I got to tell you, I came out last night. It felt like the sun was shining on me all night. I couldn't sleep. I had to come out. Like it was that bright and glaring. He's just like, and I didn't like it. At a certain point, it was like, that's enough. Like that people come to really appreciate what happens when their senses can kind of just, their whole nervous system relaxes. And then the subconscious comes and then it triggers their nervous system, but at least the external environment keeps their nervous system on some level in this kind of relaxed, rested space. So the visuals come. Some people have auditory hallucinations. My wife's one of them. After like the first day or two, she'll just like the music of the spheres is happening. And so that's something that happens for people. And it's just interesting that time doesn't really play a part in that. And then on the segue of time is that what we've seen is longer is not deeper. We've had people here for 40 days, 30 days, 20 days, 10 days. At this point, we usually don't let people go longer than 5 days if it's their first time, because what happens is safety is like the number one, is for people to feel safe. And then if they've gone over that sweet spot, when it gets uncomfortable, which it does for everyone on the first or second day, subconsciously they're like, I have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 more days of this. That's a lot. They subconsciously
pull back.
Cope. Yep. They insulate, they numb, and then everything that they do, even if it's what somebody else is doing, it's not what they're doing, but how and why they're doing it. They could still be meditating, praying and chanting and working out, but like they're doing it to change and like cover the discomfort. But then on the other side, somebody who's like, I'm uncomfortable, but I only have 1 or 2 days left. I can do this. I can be with this. They lean in and they could still do all those same things, but it's like they're doing it to like bring it in more and embrace and be with and can directly connect with it. And so that we've found is like almost shorter is deeper.
How do you prepare somebody for a dark retreat?
Yeah. Great question. And people are always asking that, and we're still trying to figure out that answer, because it's almost like, how do you prepare to die? in a sense, right? Like if you knew that today was your last day to live, but like you couldn't change your schedule for the day. Like your schedule's set, but today's your last day to live. It's not like you're going to like go see your therapist, go meditate, do a bunch of breath work. It's like these different qualities of being come in. You're going to slow down. You're going to connect. You're going to appreciate. And like that is kind of what happens in the darkness. There's no amount of like doing or preparing. I think there is some level of like somebody getting familiar with somatic practices, maybe, right? Like nothing that's result oriented. It's more like how to effortlessly drop in here, how to like soften and open. And there's almost like meditation techniques can do that, but if they bring a level of efforting, at a certain point you get tired of efforting, and so it doesn't actually, like some practice that allows someone to connect with effortlessly opening, effortlessly softening. And
it's so like a welcoming of what's there without any desire to move it or change it, but just to allow it.
Yeah, and so preparing in that way, but that's a kind of tough thing to like, unless there's one-on-one sessions, it's kind of, I mean, like sometimes people ask, I'm like, well, you could go off to the hills or go in nature and just lay down and just rest and listen. Like there's no goal, like you're just attuning to what's here. And so I think that becomes a way for people to prepare. But like, that's not enough for most people. They're like, but really, how do I prepare? Yeah, like something like I need some kind of thing like that I do for 10 minutes or an hour. And like, then it's like, but that doesn't work, because if you're going to do anything that that you get tired of doing,
right,
then you're not actually going to be able to carry that through in an eternity. So you need to, what's a way that you can connect that feels rested and relaxed, that you feel like I can, it's almost like that moment before you fall asleep, when you're laying in bed, when like all of a sudden you're like that moment, extend that moment where like you're not meditating, you're not doing anything, you're actually finally just like softening and surrendering. And it's like extending that moment right before you fall asleep, where it's just like, there's no effort, there's no goal, there's no achievement. It's just quieting.
Yeah. It is interesting because I think as, on any path, whether it's psychedelic, meditation, as you're pointing to, there's like a seeker, and there's that seeking for something beyond, outside of, or inside of self. And when you said earlier, it's just what is, it's hard for us human beings to just, when you said, if today were your last day, and you couldn't change your schedule, what would you do? I think the answer that came to me was to just like see that this is it. Like, this is it right here. And that just drops all the effort.
Right.
It just kind of, here it is.
And that's it. That drops all the effort, because it's just, this is, and like, I think we've heard that so much. Mm-hmm. This is it, be here now. But like, when you're you're in that experience of like, this is it.
Yeah.
And you don't have any other choices of anything to do. It's like you really get squeezed into, this is it. And anything that I'm efforting, and I think that like the darkness really exposes in a really soft way. That's like, it's not, the exposure happens really slowly, so you can be with it and really feel it. And so there is that exposure of like, if I'm efforting, then I'm actually not really being with what's here. And if this is my last day and I can't change my schedule, one of the number one things I'm doing is relaxing.
And becoming more present. I know that's again a cliche, but it just drops you into this right here. Totally.
Yeah. And I think that's where, for myself, from the spiritual history that I had, it was like, no, that can't be it. Like, this is not enough. I
Where's
was
the
wanting
glitter?
flashing light, like some cosmic experience. I want my heart to be exploding and welling with love, like all these things. Where's my ecstatic bliss? But I think once people settle into that,
Yeah.
they then start to enter into these profound experiences, but it's from an effortless space. So when it passes, they're still here rested. When it comes, there it's like that rested, relaxed, soft quality is it.
That's it.
And then that allows, right? That allows people to be with pain and discomfort that they haven't before. And so that's an interesting, like in our culture, if you're sad, it's not really a good thing.
No.
Like, and even spiritually, if you're sad, like move some energy, do some breath work, do a cold plunge, go for a run, have a smoothie, something. Do something. Like being sad in our culture, in our spiritual culture is just like, and that's an edge that people come up against in the dark is because it arises. And like you could try to do all the things. And there was a woman here last year. She's like, I've had depression for the last 8 years. I've had therapy. And I went up one night and I asked her what was most important to her, what matters most. And she said acceptance. And she said, but I'm afraid that if I accept how I feel, that it's not going to go away. And she was like, I feel really sad and depressed. And so I asked her, what would happen if you were going to be depressed for the rest of your life? Do you want to be in resistance to it, or do you just want to accept it? And when I went back the next day, she was so ecstatic and happy, where she's just like, the moment I authentically brought in and accepted my sadness, she said it was gone. She said there was one moment, like the first, like when I really just was like, fine. She's like, I opened and it wasn't the only thing in the space. And when she came out, she was crying with like, she's like, I'm grateful for this door handle and this rug. And she was like, I've practiced gratitude in all these spiritual circles for years, but I've never actually felt gratitude.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It is amazing, really. And it'd be nice, and I think we're getting there as a culture, hopefully, there is a lot of conversation about allowing the emotions, not suppressing emotions, allow it, to just presence it. I think that will be great for the next generations of like young children to feel like they can express what's there, hopefully anyway.
Yeah, I think that's, there's been people who have come and it's the freedom to scream in the dark and the freedom to just like, that's what a lot, like there's no rush, like you're sad. And I think that's the other, like for grieving even, like there's a lot of people who are come who's like, I've never cried this many tears in my life. It's like in our culture gives a little bit of space for grief, but then you need to get over it and get it together. Then there's this fear because you're really vulnerable when you're grieving. And so there's like, am I going to be taken advantage? Like you can't be in it. It doesn't really naturally complete. It's usually like we stop it. So then to have this space where it's like you can actually naturally allow your cycles, sadness, happiness, grief, anger, pain, you have the time to let them actually resolve on their own. Like somatically they complete and then the next wave begins. And somebody was in there and as the days went on, I was like, how's it go? And he's like, there's just, the waves are getting fewer and fewer and there's so much more space between the waves. So lots of stillness and then something else moves and then it completes. And I think that's pretty common in there. A lot of people talk about the waves, just like in plant medicine, there's the waves. In the darkness, I think they tend to be, they're intense, but like they're soft and spacious and like somebody's really grounded and clear. Like they're not like tsunamis. And so those waves still happen in there. And I think as the days go on, there's more space and people get really familiar with how to ride the waves and just allow them to move through. And there's not the self-consciousness of like, if I'm sad, I'm unworthy because my culture is going to view me that way or my spiritual, whatever, I need to move it. There's actually like, I have time and I know this is going to actually complete and I don't need to do something. And for me, after that woman came through, I had a day, some weeks later where I was feeling pretty shitty. And I was like, I could go for a run. I was like, I know I could move this energy. I'll go run and I'll feel fine. And as I was getting ready to go do that, I thought of her and I was like, you know what? I'm going to what is it like if I just lay here and just rest with it? And I could feel this pressure in me of like, but if I just lay here and rest with it, it's not going to change. And I want it to change. And I think that's what happens in the dark is you start to come up against all these things that we do. Like before we even realize we're uncomfortable, we're on our phone, we're going for a walk, we're making food. And then in the dark, you actually get into that and you can't change it. And so you learn to authentically include, welcome, and be with these parts of ourselves that we never even have contact with, aren't even exposed to.
Exile them. It's funny, I had this conversation with my mother today. Something came up for her, and she's not usually like this, but she said, I just felt like this terrible anxiety. And she's like, and I almost feel it in my back. And I was like, well, what would it be like to just kind of welcome it and tell it it can stay as long as it wants to? She was like, what? I was like, yeah, what if you just welcomed it like a child from like long ago that just never got seen and is like just here to be known? And she's like, whoa, what? I don't even know. I was like, well, let's just try it. Let's play with that. And, you know, and even when you were talking about our culture, just moving on constantly from like even grief, cultures before used to honor these things. You know, there would be like a grief dance and you as a community would come together. So I'm curious about the community aspect. Are people going in alone? Are people coming as a group going in alone and then kind of meeting people, or is it a very alone journey?
I'd say there's both of that. Right now it's pretty random if people are here with others. Like it just happens. Yeah. It just happens that it landed on that day. Two people arrived on the same day. So they're kind of settling in for that day and a half together. They go in and when they come out, they're here together. As we further evolve and refine it, there's a movement of, which we're currently in, of expanding, of building more and having it be more where there is a community, there's a community space where if you want to, you can go there and there's people there and there's some tea and there's like a space to gather. And if you don't, then you're alone and there's no pressure. There's no have to. But we do see that, it's really beautiful when people have somebody.
So how did earth medicines or psychedelics influence your path? Or did they? Yeah.
Well, definitely was huge in my initial my initial like, whoa, there's a whole world in the unseen that no one's reflecting to me. I didn't know. No one ever told me that I was complete and whole. Like my world, my culture, my family, from what they've known from their culture is that I need to do this, this, and this to be happy. I need this, this, and this to be complete and whole. And specifically psilocybin really opened that up for me. And there's a few other really significant times in my earlier days where mushrooms and when I started to get into meditation and kind of just the simplicity of even counting my breath. I remember the first time on a beach on mushrooms, just counting my breath and like, whoa, this is the most ecstatic I've ever been. And I'm just sitting here counting to 10. And so that continued to draw me deeper and deeper into spirituality and meditation practices where I was like, there's something really magical here. There's something happening and like, I want more of it. And so mostly in my earlier days, it doesn't play a huge part right now, but definitely was significant and essential in my earlier kind of awakening and attuning to deeper realities.
How would you say that a dark retreat compares and differs? Yeah. How is it like and unlike a psychedelic journey?
Yeah, great question. And there's a video on our website where we took like 20 or 30 people, asked them that question when they came out and matched it up into a whole story. And I'd say for myself and for a lot of people, there's the pace where like on a plant medicine journey, it feels like you're on a rocket ship and it's really fast and you go from 0 up to 10 and then you're kind of navigating around 10 and it takes a while. I mean, unless somebody's really deep in it, there's the orienting in that space. And then you're back down to kind of where you started. And then there's the process of how to integrate all of that. And the fact that maybe you skipped from 0 to 10, so you didn't really take the steps to get to 10. So how do you even get back up to 10 when you kind of jumped and don't even know those steps because plant medicine just brought you into that level? And then I think the darkness, it's like you crawl from 0 to 10. And so you know each step so slowly. And then by the time you're up at 10, it's like, it's who you are. It's not like you've jumped up and you know you're going to come back down. It's like now your sense of who and what you are is rested and relaxed at that level. And so you almost, I hear a lot of people, it's like you almost integrate as you go. You still come back to the world and the reflections you have in your life are not that, but you know that in your being and you got there and there's a certain like, I got there on my own. And so I think that level of empowerment of like, I can rest into that on my own because I got there on my own is a thing that I hear a lot.
Yeah. What is it like to go back into, let's say someone flies in from New York City and goes into a dark retreat for 3 days. What are you finding it's like for them to go back into busy lifestyle?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's definitely challenging. And we haven't done as much follow-up afterwards as we'd like. I mean, we stay in touch with some people and some people are always reaching out and sharing. And so I don't have the greatest pool to pull from. It tends to be the people who reach out and share, the people who had such profound experiences and are still like, I've lost kind of the direct constant connection with that, but like I'm still able to attune to it. Like if I go lay down in the bath and turn the lights out in the bathroom, I really like viscerally remember and touch that peak. Whereas like I think maybe in plant medicine or in some other, like the peaks are so far out. Maybe some of the essence lives within, but I think the darkness, the peak is such that it's like, it's in what we are, not in like the actual experience. It's like the peak of like being grounded and settled and relaxed. And from what I hear, people are still able to touch that because it became such a part of them. And I think another thing is, a lot of people say that it's just longer, which seems obvious than plant medicine, but like significant where they're like plant medicine,
right.
I'm maybe in it for 2, 3, 5, 7, 8 hours.
Right.
But this is 3 days. So it's like plant medicine stretched out. And so as I enter these new states, I'm in it for days. And that's where I think the integration comes in because it becomes what I am. I'm familiar with it and I can move in it in a grounded, settled, and coherent way. And so that being something that stands out.
Have you ever combined the two?
I haven't. There have been a couple people. I do combine darkness and cannabis. Not when I'm on my longer, like when I go in for 3, 5, 10 days, it's like I'm just in the darkness. But sometimes when I go up for 2, 3, 4 hours, I do enjoy smoking cannabis and going in. And there have been some people on the team who have enjoyed taking mushrooms and going in. And they found that container, perhaps also because of their level of like they've done the darkness retreat. So there's almost a tapping back into like, oh yeah, I know this space of just rested, relaxed, spacious right here. Like the visceral experience of like, this is it, not waiting for something to come or waiting for something to go. And then the psychedelics really in this container where somebody feels completely safe. It is something that I would like. Yeah. I haven't had the full now's the time, but it's definitely, I would like to. And with cannabis in there for me, it's been really profound of just,
I was thinking depth. Of like MDMA in there. What would that be like? Just, I don't know, just curious.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But I like the idea too of just the darkness, and just being. I mean,
there have been some people, a couple people who have come who are like, I love to microdose. I brought some microdoses with me, or I brought some psilocybin to just take a dose. Like, what do you think? And my first response is usually like, that's fine, but I would ask you why. And like, usually what we get to is the people who brought the microdoses are like, well, yeah, because if I feel uncomfortable, it would take off the edge. And it was like, you could do that, but that's not really why you're here. Like, what happens when you can't do that? And for the people with the bigger doses, there is a sense of like, well, I guess I want to have a really far out experience that reflects these spiritual ideas. And it makes me think Chogyam Trungpa, who was a Tibetan Buddhist who really knew the Western mind really well, used to say, if you ever regard any part of yourself or your experience as the dream come true, then you're involved in self-deception.
Yeah. How do we not at times as human beings fall into the delusion? I think part of it is the continued return back, maybe, until maybe there's no return. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah. Is there a death process in there?
Some people definitely liken it to like what they feel like it would be like to die. I mean, there is this element of like, you're dead to the world. Like your entire world as you know it is gone. And so I think that's where the people who don't have much spiritual context experience more of a death. Like for me, when I went in, I had all these ideas of who I was spiritually and these spiritual ideals. And so I'm in there and they're still, but people who don't have that, it's like their world dies and they've got nothing. And so, I mean, even for people who have the spiritual ideals, but like, I think it's more when we don't, because there's just nothing to hold on to. Your whole, and then how we define ourselves, right? Like what we define ourselves basically is what we do in the world, our profession, our relationships, how people think of us, the experiences we get, like everything. We lose everything that we use to define ourselves. And so there is this death. And then I think then there's just this natural exploration for anyone of like, who am I, and what matters most? And we've had a few people who have come who the way that they've framed spirituality in their life, they've come and they've left early, happily. They're like, actually, I've realized spirituality is just not important. Like I've used spirituality to fix myself, to awaken, to heal. And they're like, I don't need to do that. I just need to like be with myself. And they've left and they're like, I want to go spend time with my family. Like there's one guy who came and he's like, I come home from work and the moment I get home, I go up to my room and I meditate for 2 hours. And I actually see that I was using that as a way of like escaping my family and discomfort. And I want to go be with my family. I don't need to, spirituality isn't as important as I thought it was. The way that I was holding it, it's actually far simpler.
It's right here. True. I think, spiritual bypassing.
Right. And so that really comes up strongly in there because it just doesn't work. You can't do it long enough to bypass what you're feeling. You can't do your spiritual bypass for 24 hours for 4 days. So after you do it for about 3, 5, 7, 10 days, there was a woman who came. She'd been meditating for 15, 20 years. And she's like, I've been cultivating these practices and I really love them. I'm so grateful I have. And I see that they're actually really advanced coping mechanisms. And I've really advanced them and they're really good, but they really actually are keeping me just above what's here. And Adrian, who was doing a session, there was a guy who came, who was a breathwork teacher. And she shared this one piece that when they were in the session and something uncomfortable was happening, he would use his breath and it would look like he would resolve them. They'd be uncomfortable it would look skillful, use my breath that resolved. And at a certain point, she invited him to, like, what would happen if you just didn't try to change what was there, didn't use your technique to move the energy. And like, I mean, there's this balance, but like we usually see that would be such a skill to move the energy to resolve something. But then are we at a deeper level? Are we really resolving it, or are we just covering it? And that would be a personal exploration for everyone differently. But that's the invitation in the dark. What happens if we stop trying to fix and just genuinely meet?
All right, I'm sold. I'm coming.
Good. I'd love to be here with you.
I'm definitely going to come. Yeah. So for someone else that wants to come and join, how do we sign up? How do we, reach you and find you?
Yeah. On Instagram is Sky Cave Retreats. Our website's skycaveretreats.com. There's a contact form. The booking is kind of more personal. People send an email. We're booked out for a bit, but we have cancellations. So sometimes people spontaneously squeeze right in. And then we're also in the process of building a few more caves, so that wait list should shorten soon.
Okay. Thank you so much for talking to us today about dark retreats and the depths of going into these spaces and your own journey, and inviting us all to consider kind of relaxing and being with what is and with ourselves, and letting go of all the spiritual kind of seeking. It's such a beautiful invitation. And gosh, even to see like the trees behind you right now blowing, it's so beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the opportunity to share and be here with you.
Yeah. Thank you.